Hello and welcome to what is effectively a reaction video, something I haven't done before here on the channel. My name is Rashman and I make videos, have so far made videos about different games, mostly Formula 1 2020 weekly events or last first challenges, but today we are diving into the pit that is the conversation, the debate, the argument over the Hamilton versus Verstappen crash at Silverstone, the British Grand Prix of 2021. That just happened a few days ago, and it's a very, very hot topic. So, to disclose, I will say that I've been a Formula 1 fan since the 2003 Australian Grand Prix, which was the very first Grand Prix I ever attended, and that's how I got involved and started consuming Formula 1. Those V10 noises back in the day left a massive impact on me, but we won't go into that discussion. That's the engine noises in the past. But anyway, so watching the race live, gotta say, my initial reaction at the start was, how good is this racing? They've literally continued on from the sprint race, which was really competitive, and they've just, the first sector and then up until Cops, they were just duking it out in such a combative, fierce, professional way, leaving no room on the table, and it was just so exciting and exhilarating to watch. Just for any F1 fan, it was just some of the best we've seen. In general, I think, at least in a while. And when it came to the Cops corner, when the collision actually took place, the only reaction I could think of was,
Lewis Hamilton takes it away, but he lost off, and he's lost it!
Yeah, so the initial reaction of the actual accident was that it was a racing incident for me. It was hard racing on the first lap, and typically in the first lap racing, when such incidents occur, it is just deemed a racing incident. However, I felt a penalty for Hamilton on principle, based on the principle of consistency. And the reason I say this is because it was only 24 hours before in the sprint race that George Russell incurred a penalty for his contact against Carlos Sainz's Ferrari on the first lap of that race. And in effect, it was the same sort of scenario in the sense that Russell's front wheel clipped the back wheel of Sainz's Ferrari. And in this case, it was Hamilton's Mercedes front wheel clipping the back of Verstappen's Red Bull's wheel and sending the car off the track. The extent and the posthumous damage that occurred and the actual end result were far different, of course, but the same principle applied. And I thought, well, if Russell incurred a penalty for that, then Hamilton's going to have to incur a penalty for this as well, even though I genuinely thought it was just a racing incident. Both drivers could have and should have perhaps left more room. And I say this because I'm whilst these are different racing incidences and different contexts, but I think of the hard racing between Vettel and Webber in 2010 Turkey. I think of Verstappen and Ricciardo in 2018 Baku. And I think of Rosberg Hamilton at the Spanish Grand Prix in 2016. In all three of those examples, at least one car DNF'd. And of two of the three, both cars DNF'd as a result. And both cases were two drivers racing each other incredibly hard, and to some varying extents, to some varying percentages of blame, you could say that of responsibility, I should say, you could say that both drivers in those circumstances had a part to play to diffuse the precarious nature of the incident, or the upcoming incident. And it's no different for Verstappen and Hamilton. Verstappen could have left a little bit more room, and Hamilton could have also left a little bit more room, could have backed off and played the long game. The drivers were racing incredibly hard, and ultimately too hard to the point where not enough space was left, and an accident prevailed. So to some extent, and this is a percentage extent, because it's not black and white to say, oh, it's completely his fault or that person's fault. Both drivers had a part to play in causing the accident. Them merely racing and being present on the line they took and the position they took, how close they were to their opponent, their rival, had an impact, had a role to play with the actual accident itself. And you look at the line Hamilton took. He took a very acute, sharp line, particularly when you consider that it's the first lap of the race. You're a heavy fuel load. Your tyres are not up to temperature. Understeer is quite a common problem in this circumstance, and to some extent oversteer as well. But in this context, it was he got a complete understeer, and taking such a sharp, unusual line that was quite unrealistic for the corner. Even when he got to the exit of Cops, he was on the curbs and he lost a place to Leclerc. He was he was destined to run real wide and lose out. But regardless of that, again, the main point I'm making here is the fact that he had a heavy fuel load, he had cold tyres, or just starting the race on those tyres. It was a very ambitious move to make. And Verstappen, it's a classic Verstappen, because we've watched him since he started racing in 2015. He's always been there or thereabouts the topic of dangerous driving and moving under braking or swerving and doing very risque sort of moves. He is that kind of driver, and which is exciting to watch for sure, but it has its downsides too, and as we've seen here and elsewhere. The steward's verdicts, as per the rulebook, you can understand I understand the 10-second penalty, because by definition, the document to quote motorsport.com, in a document explaining their reasons for the sanction, the stewards explained that Hamilton could have done more to avoid the incident, as he had room on the inside of Copse to avoid a collision. And this is a direct quote. The stewards reviewed video and telemetry evidence. Cars 33 and 44 entered turn 9 with car 33 in the lead and car 44 slightly behind and on the inside. Car 44 was on a line that did not reach the apex of the corner with room available to the inside. When car 33 turned into the corner, car 44 did not avoid contact and left the front of car 44 contacted to the rear of car 33. Car 44 is judged predominantly at fault. End quote. And that is, I think by the book, as I said, quite the right way to go about it, because whilst they were side by side approaching the beginning of the Copse corner, as it got towards more midpoint, towards the apex, Hamilton was further behind, and it was just his front wheel left, and the acute angle and his understeer that he took, it meant that he couldn't take the corner as optimally as he could or would normally. And case in point, you compare it to his overtake on Leclerc around lap 50, in which he had less fuel, more cornering grip, tyre temperature. His line was far better, and there was more space too as well. But in the first lap, the angle he took simply was a little bit too ambitious. But I can really understand why he did it, because when you look at the history of the racing this year alone, you think of Imola, you think of Barcelona. Hamilton's been the one to back out. And of course, any sport, like business, like anything in life, a lot of life is psychology. And for peak athletes at the peak of their powers, the top tier of their profession, psychology is what separates them from the others. And in this case, Hamilton, knowing that he needs to reel in points off Verstappen's 33 points lead, what it was at the start of the race, he needed to make inroads, and he needed to make those ambitious ploys. And perhaps also, by doing this, he's showing to Verstappen, you may have got me once or twice before, but this time you're not. I'm going to put the hammer down. I'm going to put the hammer down and show that you can't just get your way the whole time. And I think going forward, that might have some impact on the racing between the two, especially with the severity of the accident that Verstappen had. He might have a bit more second guessing going on in his mind about how he races Hamilton now, knowing that Hamilton has demonstrated his willingness to match Verstappen's aggressive nature. But the main line going back to the steward's verdict was that car 44 was on a line that did not reach the apex of the corner with room available to the inside. And so that is where, again, with the consistency of the Russell-Sainz incident, you have to award some penalty to Hamilton for that decision. It was definitely, whilst an accident of this sort is never intentional, particularly the caliber of Lewis Hamilton, he should have been around in the sport for many years now. You got to say his track record of incidences is pretty good, which obviously makes sense for a 7-time world champion with 99 race wins under his belt now. However, his that exact expertise that I'm referring to, there should have been, you can make the case at least, that he should have been more aware that going into such a quick corner that is Copse, lap 1, with the fuel load, with the tyre temperatures not up to scratch, with the grip not optimal, and that's such a cute line that he took, it was never going to work out. And he was simply, given how the proximity he had to Verstappen, it was never going to work out optimally for both parties. And for his sake, he was very, very lucky not to avoid a non-finish for himself with a broken suspension or a broken tyre or whatever it may be. He was incredibly fortunate. Who was not fortunate, however, was Verstappen and Red Bull. And the severity of the accident, the 51G impact with the wall, his feebleness coming out of the car, even the radio message, just to show just how severe of an accident that was. And in this case, the reason why there's such an uproar is because the impact that the accident had on Verstappen and on the team, on Red Bull team, was far worse than what I've been referring to, the Sainz or Russell, and the fact that Hamilton kept racing onward and would eventually win. It just didn't. It doesn't. You look at it, it doesn't sit too well. And on this note, I think it's important we trace back to, I believe it's the French Grand Prix. And after Vettel hit Bottas at the beginning of that race, Hamilton commented, this is 2018, Hamilton made this comment, quote, "Ultimately, if you ruin someone's race because of a mistake, and you're able to come back to a place ahead of the other person, that penalty doesn't outweigh your mistake. You shouldn't be able to finish ahead of the other person if you take them out of the race. It's like you're violating the speed, but just let you go." End quote. So I think what this shows is Hamilton has that maturity, has that experience to know that that his move was incredibly aggressive, and of course it was aggressive from Verstappen too. But he should perhaps have had more awareness of his own car, of his own capabilities on lap 1 in such a quick corner, and to account for the risk that was involved in that manoeuvre. And in the way that, in that exact quote that I just read, is well, I don't know if you'd like to hear that right now, to be honest. I think from at the end of the race, the way in which Hamilton celebrated, again, this is a chalk and cheese comparison to some extent, but he was very, very satisfied, very content to win his 8th home Grand Prix, running on the emotions of that and storming through. He did a brilliant race when you think of it, to come back and putting the crash aside. He's managed to come back from that 10-second penalty, overtake Leclerc with a couple laps to go, and win that record-matching race of 8 wins. He's high on emotion, but I think some of the comments he made, whilst he eventually became aware that Verstappen was in hospital, the way he kind of lay that accusation so bluntly, like, you can understand again with that emotion, but to me it reminds me of what I've read about Michael Schumacher in 1997 after the Jerez accident with Jacques Villeneuve. And a large reason why Schumacher was disqualified, or had his points disqualified in that title that year, that title race that year, 1997, was the way in which he conducted himself and thought he was not at fault for his part to play in that Jerez incident. And if this is a reflective and a piece to think about, like, if he got banned for that, a whole year was worth of points. And currently, Hamilton, the way his conduct was not the same, but there are perhaps some parallels. And well, it'll be interesting to see if that leads to any further consequences for Hamilton. I don't think it will. I don't think it will lead to a further penalty, but ultimately, really, it is. Because really, the FIA felt that they have awarded the penalty, and much like Jolyon Palmer said in his analysis of the collision, if both cars had failed to finish, both crashed at that impact, we would have simply deemed it a racing incident. It's just that the after effect of the accident was that Hamilton was able to continue, Verstappen DNF'd, copping a 51G impact. The car is a wreck. Who knows how much it's going to cost him to fix, and he lost potentially 25 points and had his championship lead quashed. I think the outcome is why there's been such a negative feedback regarding Hamilton and regarding the incident and regarding the FIA themselves. I have to acknowledge that the end result, which has been discussed regarding Verstappen, from that you do understand the calls for a harsher penalty, including a race ban. Not that I was suggesting that a year-long suspension on the basis of the Schumacher-Jerez 97 incident is what I was insinuating, but I do understand the calls of dissent and the protests that cloud Hamilton right now, and why people think that the 10-second penalty was too lenient. I do understand that. So, to conclude though, in my conclusion, both drivers were racing incredibly hard, evidenced by the start till the crash, the first sector and half of the second sector, also the sprint race, and the previous races at Imola and Barcelona. We really are witnessing a incredibly highly contestable championship this year, with two drivers driving immaculately. More room could have been left, however by the apex Hamilton was that little bit too far back to make a realistic overtake, and lacked sufficient grip and performance from the car and for the acute line that he took to make the overtake. And we can only hope that the season continues to entertain us in such a way, and that such incidents prove not to be so divisive or decisive in the championship for that matter. But we have to be wary that such consequential racing incidents don't change the landscape, don't change the rule book too much. We have to be cautious about rewriting or writing the rules and the laws of the sport itself in such times, especially when emotions are running so high. So that is my conclusion. Let me know what you think. And of course, this debate, this conversation will continue on all season, if not longer. It'll be a topic for the ages of Formula One, perhaps, given its contestable nature and how there is percentage and portion to blame on both sides. Ultimately, what we're seeing, I think, is exciting racing, and it's good racing in the context of the World Championship. And of course, with the impact and the damage and the accident, that's not what we're after, wanting to see. But you rewind to 4 cops, that sort of racing, that is what is making this season shaping up to be such an adventure to watch. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Take care, like and subscribe if you like this content and like to see more Formula 1 videos and other games as well, because they're going to be coming more, and other pieces as well. Stay tuned for more. Otherwise, have a good one.